Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Mariyama, Chair of Livable Raleigh, and I want to welcome you to Livable Raleigh's community conversation about the tax increment grant. Tonight, we will be sharing new information about the City of Raleigh tax increment grant policy, and we will discuss how TIGs will affect our city's tax revenue and your pocketbook. Before we begin our program tonight, I want to assure you that Livable Raleigh is well aware of the decision to delay the city elections by more than a year until November 8th, 2022, and to change the election process by eliminating runoffs and moving to a plurality vote. The mayor and the city council essentially just gave themselves a 3-year term without any ability for voters to decide whether they deserve to serve another 13 months in office. Please plan to stay engaged with Livable Raleigh as we continue to stand up for democracy, and we will inform you through our blogs and our social media about the next city elections. We will host another community conversation on the city elections in the very near future. Please stay tuned. There are a few housekeeping details about the Zoom meeting to mention before we begin. Number one, all attendee microphones will be muted. We will be taking questions from the floor when the presentations end, and your mic will be unmuted. This meeting is being recorded. Next slide, please. Now I would like to turn over the meeting to Yvonne Brannon and Bob Geary, who will be your facilitators for tonight's community conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and everyone, please forgive me for having a terrible cold, and I'm trying to get over it, and I hope you'll bear with me. We're very excited to be here tonight as co-facilitators. Bob, Gary, and I are, like many of you, we moved here years ago to the city that we soon loved, and we have been actively involved in making our communities better, we hope, and actively involved in paying attention to what's going on locally in politics, how our city and our county is run. So tonight we're going to be joined by a wonderful group of panelists, David Cox, Maria Cervania, Wanda Hunter, and Larry Helfont. Before that, we're going to have Parker Martin, who is a tax policy expert from the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, part of the North Carolina Justice Center, do a presentation on a little bit more information about the TIG policy and his expert review of that policy. So before we get started, Bob, people keep asking me, what is a TIG? And no, it's not a tick, but it's related. Bob, can you explain a little bit about it? Okay, we're waiting for Bob to get unmuted. And I want to
Yes, unmuted. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So what's a TIG? A TIG is a tax increment grant to a developer, cutting the property taxes for a development project for an extended period of time. So the T in TIG stands for taxes, and the G stands for grant, but it might as well stand for giveaway, because when a developer gets a TIG from the city or the county, he, she, or they gets a whopping discount of up to 75% off on property taxes they would owe, and that discount goes on for many years. The developer is given the right, in other words, to take money from city revenues or county revenues, and the rest of us have to replace it year after year after year. So next slide. And that's why we developed this little graphic at Livable Raleigh. The developers who get TIGs are in effect allowed to siphon money out of the Raleigh city budget over an extended period of time. So next slide. TIG bottom line, developers get tax breaks, we get the tax bill. I like that. So next slide. So we have a TIG policy now, and Parker Martin will talk in detail about what the policy is, and I'll say a little bit about it shortly. We don't have any TIG grants yet, but we have developers in there pitching for them. The first and biggest, Kane Realty, for the Downtown South project, which is 150 acres of land at I-40 and South Saunders and South Wilmington Street for unspecified benefits in return for his TIG grant. A second pitch has been made for a project in Midtown for a pedestrian bridge over I-440, the Beltline. And there are other TIG pitches in the wings. A second one that is shrouded in mystery so far, also in Midtown near North Hills, but we don't know exactly what they're asking for or what they're proposing to spend the money on if they get it. So next slide. Tax increment financing sounds good in theory, but it can run amok. You give the first tax increment grant out, and pretty soon every developer in town wants a tax increment grant. And unless you've got a very trustworthy city council and mayor, you can end up like Chicago, where there are now 136 tax increment grant districts. They cover a third of the city. In 2018, these TIF grants totaled $841 million, 12.5% of the property tax base, according to Medill reports from Northwestern University. Next slide. We looked around the country for examples of cities that have made good use of tax increment financing, and frankly, we couldn't find any. But we did find that in Minneapolis, they made so many tax increment grants, and St. Paul as well. In Minneapolis, the grants gobbled up 15% of their tax base, and then they stopped making them. There was a Chamber of Commerce, a Raleigh Chamber of Commerce trip to Minneapolis, St. Paul a few years ago, and the mayor of St. Paul said for the politicians there, tax increment grants were like crack cocaine. The first one seemed good, but pretty soon you're hooked. Every developer wants one. Every politician has to hand them out, and the public is on the hook for all that money. So next slide. So TIGs in North Carolina, Charlotte, Mecklenburg have made limited use of TIGs. No one else in North Carolina does, and Charlotte, Mecklenburg is cutting back dramatically on TIGs. Their policy allows them to eat up 3% of their property tax base with TIG grants, but they actually don't come anywhere near that. Raleigh has never used tax increment financing. Next slide. So we had a proposal in 2007. We've seen this movie before with our friend John Kane. John Kane wanted a $75 million tax increment grant from the city for his North Hills East project. He'd already developed North Hills. He went across Six Forks Road to develop North Hills East, and he asked for $75 million to build a parking deck in North Hills East. And he said, poor pitiful me, I cannot build that parking deck in North Hills East unless I get the city money to do it. And if I don't get it, all I'm going to be able to afford in North Hills East is a strip mall with a lot of surface parking. Charles Meeker was the mayor at the time. He said Kane's massive subsidy made no sense at all to the average citizen. Next slide. Charles said it would be improper, inequitable to provide parking to one builder of a development. Why wouldn't you provide that kind of subsidy to every developer with a parking deck? That was in 2007. By the way, next slide. John Kane did not get his TIG grant in 2007. North Hills East developed exactly as it would have otherwise. It is not a strip mall, as we all know. Next slide. So in 2020, Kane is back, and he's asked for TIG grants from the city and the county, and they total, by our calculation, he wants 75% off of his tax bill for 30 years on a $2 billion project. So that translates to a $450 million tax break that he's seeking from the county and the city for downtown South. And that's a depiction by Kane of what he intends downtown South to be. Now, if you have been following on, so there's a stadium. He shows a stadium in downtown South. I guess we can go to the next slide. And the TIG grant, is it all about this soccer stadium that Kane proposed early last year? And in fact, I think the answer is no. The soccer stadium, I think, was fictional because we don't have a soccer team that needs it. It was the shiny object that made the downtown South publicity photos look like a TIG might be a good idea, but in fact, it isn't. Next slide. So, but unlike Charles Meeker, our current mayor, Mary Ann Baldwin, is selling Kane's scheme. She's not telling him it makes no sense. She has turned his pitch for a TIG into a new policy that will allow the city to make TIG grants of up to $5 million a year for up to 15 years for $75 million, in other words, that city council can commit next week if they want to. And I think they're on the verge of making a major TIG grant to Kane. And that limit of $5 million a year, the policy sets a 2% cap on the amount of property taxes that can be committed via TIGs, but the 2% cap can be changed at the next city council meeting. So it's not a real hard cap. And the city council is getting pitches for other TIGs from other developers, and they are Mary Ann Baldwin's major campaign contributors. So next slide. Here's Raleigh's new TIG policy, and it is wide open. Developers can get up to 75% off their property taxes for up to 15 years. As I said, TIGs are capped at 2% of current citywide property taxes, but that's a cap that can be changed at the next council meeting. And by the way, there's nothing in the policy that prohibits city council from making multiple TIG grants to the same developer. And as I said, Kane has asked for 30 years worth of TIG grants, 75% off. So next slide. The TIG policy says a TIG grant can be made to a developer in return for some portion of the infrastructure that they build or some form of community benefits that they offer. Go back, all right. Or here's a lovely term in the policy. The funding commitments can be general financial support for the entire development project. And I believe that language is in this policy to justify a generalized TIG grant to Kane for the downtown South project in return for some or all of the vague, some or none really, of the vague community benefits that he's talked about for more than a year. So next slide. Community engagement. The policy says there's going to be community. Actually, it doesn't. It doesn't say there will be community engagement. It says there may be community engagement about TIG grants, who gets them and what they're for. The council will determine how to get public input before making a TIG grant. And it may include a council appointed committee, or it may include neighborhood feedback sessions, or may not. Next. So TIG grants, do they ever make sense? And yes, in fact, in theory, they do. Tax increment financing can be used and is properly used to subsidize a development in a place where development would not otherwise occur, or to subsidize an element of a development that would not otherwise happen if the grant were not made. But as we've seen with Kane's North Hills East project, he asked for a grant to build a parking deck. He didn't get it. He built the parking deck anyway. So, but of course he did, because the tall buildings that he put in North Hills East that made him so much money over there, they required a parking deck. And anyone with two eyes realized he was going to build not one parking deck over there, but multiple parking decks, and he didn't need the city's money to do it. So tax increment grants can make sense, but be careful that you're not paying for something that would happen anyway, and that is just putting money in a developer's pocket. So next. We did a forum on tax increment grants in February before the city adopted its policy. And we had a speaker from the Budget and Tax Center then, Alexandra Sirota, and she said that her analysis of tax increment financing around the country and in North Carolina showed that tax increment financing has not successfully delivered on the promise of community benefits, but rather has committed public dollars to the pockets of developers. That was her conclusion then. She urged the city and county not to adopt a policy to allow tax increment grants. The city has now adopted a policy to allow them. The county is thinking about it. We'll hear from Maria Cervania later, about who is a county commissioner, about where the county stands now. But the city is moving ahead. Marianne Baldwin is determined to put money in John Kane's pocket. That's clear. And so next slide, we have, again, a speaker tonight from the Budget and Tax Center. Parker Martin is going to do a deep dive into the city's TIG policy as adopted, and its strengths, if there are any, and its weaknesses, which I think he will find. And Parker, graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, master's from Duke, worked as a senior analyst at NC Growth. Now he's at the Justice Center. He is a tax expert. He's a very smart guy. So Parker, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bob. I'll go ahead and get started. As Bob said, my name is Parker Martin. I'm a policy analyst with the Budget Tax Center over at the North Carolina Justice Center, and I'm going to be going over the tax increment grant policy and the implications that it has for communities and residents. And this is a policy that was adopted back on May 4th. Next slide, please. So there's a preview for this presentation. I'll give an overview and touch on some of the things that Bob had mentioned, an overview of the tax increment grant policy, then talk about some of the main concerns that we have at the Budget and Tax Center as it pertains to the current policy, talk about some room for clarification and language clarification, and then discuss potential next steps. Next slide, please. So I do want to say in terms of the TIG, so I know that Bob had mentioned increment financing. So there are subtle differences between a TIF and a TIG. TIF, my interpretation is the city is using, would be using bonding, or municipalities use bonding and put capital up front to help finance these developments and get that money back. A TIG is going to be a grant after a reimbursement after a development is finished. So in terms of the general purpose of this tax increment grant, to finance development and generate public benefit, typically in areas that have had historic underinvestment or disinvestment. And it does that again by providing tax dollars, as Bob said, back to developers. So a percentage of whatever their property tax would be once the development or project is completed, they're getting some of that money back. And that can range from 50 to 75%. And I'll discuss that in the next slide. In terms of the criteria and the project requirements for the TIG, again, as it is adopted currently, the project must, as I mentioned, demonstrate these public benefits to the public and the citizens of Raleigh. And it must align with some of the economic development priorities that the city has outlined. I believe it must abide by the city's strategic plan. There's a few other things. There's a list of about 6 or 7 of these requirements, and it must also pass a but-for analysis. Now, I want a but-for analysis, what that is, and I'm going to describe it because I'm going to bring that up later on in the presentation. A but-for analysis is essentially the city will conduct this analysis and make a determination whether a developer would have been able to create a project or complete project, but for a TIG. So they're trying to determine, would this developer be able to build it, whatever this project ends up being, if they did not have a TIG. And if they determine that they wouldn't be able to, then they will get the TIG or the grant. Now, it must also fall into an investment category, at least investment category 1, or be in conjunction with investment category 2. So what does this mean? So these projects that are created, there has to be investment. There must be investment in category 1, which includes infrastructures and facilities. And this can be investment into things such as parks, roadways, parking, etc. Or it could be investment category 1, as well as in addition to investment category 2, which is public benefits, which include affordable housing, job creation, etc. And I know there's probably questions already about, the general purpose is to generate public benefit, and category 2 is quote unquote optional. I'll discuss that and we'll cover that a little bit later on because there's some concerns there as well. But those are some of the criteria for a TIG. Next slide, please. In terms of the size and the timing of the grant, so again, this can vary depending on the specific area in which the project is located. So if it's inside or outside of a priority area outlined in the economic development priorities the city had, or the city maps has, which I'll show in the next slide, that determines what the size is, whether it's 50% or 75%, or if it's going to be up to 10 years or 15 years. So again, most of they're trying to get investment inside these priority areas, so these areas that need investment. It's going to be up to 75% of the property taxes that they would pay each year upon completion, and up to 15 years after it's completed as well. So the next slide, please. This right here is a map of the priority areas. It's kind of all over the place. The green areas are going to be the priority areas. The white is outside of priority areas. You can see some areas, to be honest, seem to have had more investment in past years than others. So it kind of seems to be sporadically all across the city of Raleigh. But these are where you can see which areas would be getting 75% in terms of that grant, and which areas would be getting 50%. Next slide, please. And the last piece of the overview before I get into the concerns. So there is a public engagement. There's mention of public engagement in the most recent updated policy. There has to be a public hearing required for these projects, for these TIG projects, and it varies depending on whether the project is investment category 1, or if it does investment category 1, investment category 2. I won't get into the nitty gritty of that. It just there will be a public hearing of sorts. Again, depends on. It will be a feedback session. It could be, a committee meeting. It's kind of vague on what that would look like. It states that there should be or must be a public engagement aspect to it. Now, in terms of the limits and the compliance and evaluation, again, as Bob had mentioned, a TIG program, it cannot exceed 2% of Raleigh's annual property tax levy in a given year. And council must also, they'll establish reporting mechanisms for each of these projects, and they'll, have to satisfy expectations before reimbursement occurs after the project is completed. And there's also mention of a recapture provision as well, and it'll be implemented in certain circumstances. So that is a brief overview of the policy. And now I kind of want to delve into some of the concerns that we have and some language clarification. Next slide. And what I'll do as well, what I want to, while I'm going over this so you all can follow along, I'm going to paste the policy itself in the chat if you all want to take a look while I'm going through to see what I'm talking about and follow along. One of the first things concerns, again, as it pertains to, downtown South is a big thing that has dominated a lot of the conversation, but it's not the only one. I think that there's concerns that we have over at Budget and Tax Center with these big developers and these big projects of setting precedent moving forward and using this grant. And I think that with these big developers in particular, there's already a lot of tools that exist already, whether that be in the form of low-income housing tax credits, you have opportunity zones, rezoning, things that benefit these developers already. And I'm just really concerned that with these large profitable developers, I'm just using something else to kind of get out of paying their fair share, giving their tax money to the city of Raleigh that can be used for other things. And this right here is a projection that I used. The numbers, it varies depending on the tax amount. I think this was for the tax amount for this past year. I think it's 35 to 37. Let's say 35 to 37 cents per $100, and based off of the $2 billion that's projected for Kane Realty's Downtown South. So you can see that depending on what's used, the TIG totals how much Downtown South and Kane Realty would get, depending on whether it's 50% or 75%. That's a lot of money. And again, this is just a projection. This is not 100% accurate. This is just some numbers that we were fiddling around with and wanted to show a visualization. But at the end of the day, again, for these large developers, what else could that money be used for? A lot of times, again, it seems like these large developers would have built these properties or these developments even without a TIG as is. So if they were going to do that, what could that property tax revenue be used for? We're talking about, $36 to $80 million possibly for Downtown South. Next slide, please. Another aspect and concern that we have is around equity and building equity. So the policy, currently as drafted, there's no reference to equity concerns explicitly. Now, I know under project requirements, if y'all look under page 2, there is mention that the projects must meet at least one of the city's economic development principles. And one of those principles is, developing programs that encourage, social and economic inclusion, diversity, et cetera, and discusses workforce development and minority and women contracting. But I don't think that's not enough. I mean, given the current environment we are in and the disparate outcomes that exist and continue to be exacerbated, I think there needs to be explicit reference and a requirement for equity. And what could that look like? I mean, that could be requiring, since these developers are getting money back. If it's a big developer and they're building housing units, requiring that there's an acceptance of housing choice vouchers and targeting folks that are 40% AMI. So folks who need the most assistance. Also, required use of hubs. So hubs are historically underutilized businesses. These are women-owned and Black, Indigenous, and people of color-owned businesses in North Carolina. And the hub office was created to help these businesses secure contracting. And one of the goals of hubs in this program is to make sure that these entities and these businesses, in all the public contracts that exist for like cities, school boards, local governments, for all the different things that they're contracting with, at 10% all of contracts that go towards these hub firms. And there's been, I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here. This is another project that I'm working on currently, but there's a lot of issues with the hubs as well. So hubs, exist, and they're trying to make sure that at least 10% of all contracts go to hubs, but that has been significantly well below that mark that has been set by the state since its inception in 2000, and there's been a lot of issues there. So that could be an opportunity to do that. Also, requiring engagement in first source hiring, as well as paying a livable wage. So I think those are some opportunities there. Next slide. The next thing is securing public benefits, specifically around the but-for analysis. So I think with this, the city is the one that's conducting the but-for analysis, and I think that being really critical of the methods and the criteria used for that analysis, and determining if it really is rigorous and thorough enough, and looking at the economic and demographic trajectory of the city of Raleigh to determine if a developer really would need this TIG. And I think I wonder, and we're concerned whether or not this but-for analysis would be an open process, and if the community could see what variables and factors were used to determine or make these determinations when going through a TIG program or TIG application. And I also think it would be important to consider doing an opportunity cost analysis. So what else could these, again, going back to one of the concerns I had mentioned with all the money that could possibly go to Downtown South and Kane Realty, what else could this money be used for? There's other things that could be used to benefit community members in the city of Raleigh. Next slide, please. Another aspect and concern that we have is that a lot of, Charlotte was the first city in North Carolina that had a tax increment grant program and implemented it. And a lot of the current policy is similar in structure to Charlotte's. There may not be issues with that, but I think that there needs to be or should have been an intentional effort made in determining whether there should have been additional provisions added or removed given the context of Raleigh and Wake County. And what do I mean by this? So Charlotte, for example, we talked to some folks down in Charlotte a few months ago that were familiar with the TIG and had worked with the TIG. It seems like they're doing a little bit more in regards to affordable housing and have stronger commitments in regards to affordable housing and targeting folks who are below 80% AMI and making sure that there's a higher share of total units that are dedicated for affordable housing specifically. And I think that should be something that should be replicated as well in this policy, given the context, again, of Raleigh and Wake County and the large amount of issues that revolve around displacement and gentrification as well. Next slide, please. This one is concerns around the revenue growth. This graph right here is illustrating the year-over-year revenue growth that Raleigh has received from tax. So there has been growth from property taxes over time, but you can see that it's fluctuated quite a bit. And I think what I really want to point out, if you go to the next slide with this showing of the fluctuations, is for these developers, again, particularly the ones that are very large, very profitable, a TIG is likely going to encourage multiple projects over successive years. And revenue growth, as we know, with regards to property taxes, is going to fluctuate. And my concern and our concern there is lost growth or slow growth or declines in growth in down years is going to amass over time. So again, instead of giving this grant money back to the developers, if they were going to build this anyway, what could that money be used for? Could it be used for these foundational equitable initiatives to make the city of Raleigh more prosperous and equitable for all residents and citizens? So I think that's the main concern that I want to highlight as it pertains to the revenue growth. Next slide, please. And the last concern before we get into some of the areas for language clarification is wondering how this is going to work in conjunction with Wake County. There's not a TIG currently in Wake County, and it's not really clear how things will operate between the city and Wake once these developers have access to a TIG. But also with this, I thought it was interesting, there's an aspect in there, particularly again with affordable housing. It states that the city strongly encourages any project that includes affordable housing to also seek financial assistance from Wake County. And I think that from our interpretation, it seems a little dismissive. And again, that's very concerning. I mean, affordable housing is a huge issue. It's a very pressing need in the Triangle. And I think that Raleigh has the means and the funds to address this. And I wonder if this is a way to kind of get around this, if this is just not putting the best foot forward to address this crisis that we are currently experiencing. So the next slide, I'll go through language clarification. I'll try to go fairly quick. I want to be respectful of other presenters and panelists' time. So again, in terms of the introduction, this was mentioned in Bob's piece in regards to the funding commitments and in terms of the partial and full reimbursements for developer costs, and also recognizing the overall benefits for the city. I think the wording here, it makes it unclear of what can be funding. I think what specific developer costs qualify. Also, what is preventing applicants from making it appear that more developer costs are associated with a project, so they can get more TIG money. I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of as well. And also, I know that there's some criteria and requirements, but it's still wondering who is recognizing the benefits and what exactly is the public benefit that a project brings and who gets to determine that. So yes, there's a few criteria, but it's still not clear to me and other folks at the Budget and Tax Center what that actually is and what that actually means. Next slide, please. Another place where we were concerned and could see there be some clarification is the objective of the tax increment grant policy. And one of the sentences, as you can read here, talks about, is to increase the tax base, advance economic growth, et cetera. I think in this statement, it should also include reference to gentrification and displacement. So again, yes, okay, you're going to use this tax increment grant to for developments, et cetera, but you need to also be cognizant that if you're going to do this, you need to put forth an effort to counter gentrification pressures that accompany urban development, redevelopment, and always have, and always will accompany development, redevelopment. I think it's very important to have that in there as well. Next slide. The next thing that we have in here is under the investment categories section in the policy. It states that a TIG must fall into infrastructure facilities investment category or in combination with public benefits investment category. And this goes back to one of the earlier slides that I was talking about. Again, that there's some confusion there. It mentions that TIGs are for the public benefit, yet the public benefits investment category is, in conjunction, or it is optional. I think that's that just doesn't make sense to me. It's hard for me to conceptualize how it's bringing public benefits, but the public benefits investment category in and of itself is, quote unquote optional. I don't think it should be. And with that being said, I understand if there's, I understand if it's a smaller, developer that, maybe just redoing a road or building a park, they may not have the means to build affordable housing, but at the very least, they can help out with job creation and workforce development, things of that nature. And that should be required. I don't think that shouldn't be negotiable. In my opinion, I think that needs to be clarified there as well. Next slide, please. Also going back to or referring to public benefits, this is also on an investment category section of this adopted policy. It talks about, the investment should include or could include community benefits such as job creation, workforce development, and construction, community amenities, et cetera. It shouldn't read could, it should read as must. Again, going back to what I had just mentioned in the previous slide, it must include these things. I don't think there's any room for negotiation given the disparate outcomes and systemic issues that we've been dealing with in the triangle and just across the state and across the nation. It shouldn't be optional. And also, I don't think that affordable housing should be referenced as a community amenity. I think it's a necessity. It should be a primary goal and outcome of a TIG and investment. Next slide. This is talking about the but-for analysis in particular. Again, what I am trying to get out of here is just the concerns of who, what aspects and variables are being considered for this but-for analysis. And will these findings be public and released publicly? And can we look at those and critique those as these TIG applications are happening? And I think as well, I think it's important, like they mentioned here, the city must determine that certain public benefits and policy objectives outlined in the project proposal, would not be incorporated into a project, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's important that there is a specific set of public benefits and policy objectives. Again, it still remains very, very vague as the policy currently stands. And the last language clarification before I wrap up, sorry for being long-winded, but I wanted to make sure that I covered as much as possible. If you could go to the next slide, please, is reporting and certification, and certification of benefits and evaluation criteria. So the very last section of this policy, it mentions the recapture provisions and talks about it be case by case. I think this needs to be explicitly stated here for transparency, and it shouldn't be a case by case. I think that it should state that funds will be recaptured if or reimbursement will not occur if a project does not meet the city council's expectations or satisfactions, or if have given out a year or two of a TIG grant to a developer and come to find out that this development is not bringing the benefit that they had agreed to, then they get back some of the money that that the city had given to the developer in the form of a grant. So I think there needs to be some clarification there as well. And the last slide, I'll wrap up. Again, apologies for going fairly quick. It's a lot of information to unpack, but potential next steps as it pertains to this. Again, this policy was adopted back on the 4th of May. So it is, the people will start hearing about projects applying for TIGs in the coming months, coming weeks. I'm not sure how long that process will be or when that will happen. But I think it's important to ask for more information from city officials and talk to city council members about concerns. Again, some of the concerns that may have been outlined in this presentation, or concerns that you have after you read the policy. Again, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement. I think it's important to also reevaluate the proposed public comment period. So, there was mention that there was going to be a public engagement period in the policy towards the ending, that there must be public hearings, et cetera. But how long is that going to be? Is it going to be lengthy enough for the community to be fully included and offer sufficient feedback to these projects? I don't know. I think that needs to be evaluated or reevaluated possibly, but also keeping track of these upcoming TIG projects. So again, Bob had mentioned, obviously there's Kane Realty in downtown South. There's the pedestrian bridges. There's others that are, also in the wings that are possibly coming up. Keeping track of those and seeing when those are going to be on the docket and discussed in the coming months and weeks, but also continuing to mobilize the community. It's very important to mobilize and make sure that our voices are heard. And if there are concerns, that our concerns are addressed. Like I said, at the end of the day, I just think that this is, there needs to be some improvements, and we can't keep putting these issues that, in terms of gentrification and affordable housing and workforce development, we can't keep putting those to the side. And I think this has an opportunity to kind of exacerbate those. So that is my presentation. I'll be around for a little bit longer. This is my contact information. Please feel free to shoot me any questions or ask me any questions, shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to respond. But that is all I have for y'all today, or this evening, excuse me.
Okay, Parker, thank you so much. That was just an excellent analysis of the city's policy and its weaknesses, and you're finding more strengths in it than I do, but I think you were fair to it. I might be just a little too critical, but I don't trust our city council to be thoughtful about how they're going to make TIG grants, and I guess that's my difficulty in reading this policy. So we now turn to our four panelists. And the first, so David Cox is a Raleigh City Council member. Maria Cervania is one of our Wake County Commissioners. Wanda Hunter is a community representative from South Raleigh, Southeast Raleigh specifically. And Larry Helfont is a community representative from the Midtown area, and he knows about that pedestrian bridge, and we're going to get to that. But I want to start with David Cox, and I want to ask him, I think there's a slide. Yeah, so David, when the new council took office last year, at the beginning of last year, the mayor used a council retreat, turned it into a kind of infomercial for John Kane, took everybody down to see the downtown South site. I wonder if you can describe what happened that day.
Yes, I mean, typically these retreats, we get together, we each talk about what we hope to accomplish as city council members, the direction that we want to take the city in. But on this particular day, there was a large segment of time, several hours actually, set aside for John Kane, who came in and gave a presentation to us. We met in the convention center. There was a presentation, and then we were taken on a bus trip to downtown South, and to see the various properties that would be assembled into what is envisioned to be downtown South. The news media were invited along as well, and it was really a show and tell. And in my opinion, it was really strange, because what we were doing as a council was really giving preferential treatment to one developer. I mean, Raleigh has many developers, small and large, but in this particular case, we were definitely showing deference to Mr. Kane, and it was quite clear that the mayor was quite excited about downtown South, and as I recall, this is really when the idea of tax increment financing or a tax increment grant was first brought up and discussed. And it was discussed in the context of creating the soccer stadium in downtown South. And then as the pandemic came on, and I think as people became critical of spending tax dollars on a soccer stadium. Then it became known as an entertainment facility, and now we have a policy where there's nothing specific has been stated for what it would be used for, but as previous speakers pointed out, it could be used for just the general development of a project without any identified specific community benefit.
So,
let's talk.
so you voted no, when the policy was adopted, it was a 7-1 vote, and you were the one vote
Right.
against it. What are the one or two things reasons for opposing this?
Well, there were many. One of them was just the idea of giving individual developers tax breaks, while at the same time, you know, we now have a budget for the new year that's going to result in a tax increase for everybody. And it seems like what we're doing is taking from one group and giving it to someone else who's very privileged. And that, to me, that is fundamentally just not right. The other thing is, for example, let's talk about benefits, community benefits. And one of the things in the rezoning for the property behind Wegmans in Raleigh was that well, we could use a TIG to build this pedestrian bridge and connect the neighborhood over to where Wegmans and what will ultimately become at least $1 billion development behind Wegmans. And really, the right approach should have been, when that rezoning came to us, we should have negotiated a bridge in the conditions of that rezoning request. It doesn't have to be paid for by. It didn't have to be paid for by tax dollars. It could have been paid for by the developer if the developer really wanted that upzoning for very tall buildings. And as it was pitched to me, we're talking about luxury apartments, and we're talking about upscale office and potentially manufacturing on the site. This would be biomedical, for biomedical research, for example. We're talking about tech companies coming in. We're talking about something that's really, you know, top-notch in terms of employment and top-notch in terms of housing and luxury housing. And it is true, you know, if you go over on the other side of 440 where Bush Street is, Councilor Buffkin lives on Apache, I believe, which is, his backyard is on Bush Street. So I have to question that self-interest and question the use of tax dollars for one's self-enrichment, if you will. So there are those aspects of it.
Let me
Yeah,
stop
go
you.
ahead.
Let me stop you there, and I'm going to turn to Maria Cervania, because John Kane at least has asked for a TIG grant, not just from the city, but also from the county, and the counties would be bigger. 75% off the county tax bill would be roughly twice the discount, the break that the city would offer. So Maria, I think we have a slide to look at from, next slide. Yes, so we had a speaker in February, Vicki Adamson, one of your fellow commissioners, and we talked about whether the county would have a TIG policy, and if so, would it make a grant to Downtown South? And at that time, she was very uncertain whether the county commissioners were going to even entertain the idea of a TIG policy. Where does that stand now? Now that the city has adopted a policy, what is the county thinking about this?
So I want to thank everybody for inviting us today to speak on this and provide an update. To answer your question, Bob, John Kane through Bonner Gaylord also provided a presentation for us during that February timeframe. And if you all, and I welcome all of you to visit that recording, our responsibility is to the Raleigh citizens or Raleigh people who live, work, play in Raleigh and all of Lake County. And you entrusted us to be good stewards of your tax dollars. You know, these TIGs in theory are just paper numbers passed along across paper, but in reality, they are a significant amount of money that has so much implication on the work that we do. Now, you know, Parker had mentioned the category 1 capital improvement, category 2 public benefit. This is exactly what we decide on as county commissioners, providing to our people in Raleigh and in Wake County. And if we provide that in a TIG, and this was the discussion, then we give it to John Kane to decide how our responsibility is towards capital improvement, human services, affordable housing, transportation. So just to answer your question, you know, from that time, we prioritized to have staff identify alternative funding streams to be able to fund these different public benefits that have been identified at the time. And we have not further talked about the TIG because we want to find that money in other places that is of our responsibility and usually acquired by the partnerships that we have either with the state, federal government, even with private partners. And Mr. Ulmer had actually put a note here on, and I'll talk about that a little later because there is a big difference between providing a TIG to a developer and encouraging economic development by encouraging a corporation to come into our area. Because we can put upon a lot of strict requirements to provide a tax break for that. So just to cut to the chase, Bonner Gaylord at the time said he was going to approach us in September. In last conveyance of in that it's been pushed out to the end of the year. So I think the priority has been that John Kane and his organization was going to prioritize the city of Raleigh first and see what they can do before they approached us.
All right, so I want to underline what you just said about affordable housing and workforce development. The county has grant programs that allow grants directly to the providers of affordable housing or the providers of workforce training. There really isn't any reason to let that money flow through a developer. And we did prepare a slide anticipating the question about Apple. So the county, there it is. The county did make a grant and the state did as well as an incentive to Apple to come to Morrisville in Wake County. And Apple promised jobs and Apple promised money for schools and community benefits, infrastructure. Talk about that. There's a big difference between a company that actually employs people and a developer who builds buildings. Doesn't really employ anybody. He employs a few people, but he's not employing the people who go to work in his buildings.
It's quite a contrast, Maria.
Correct. Yes. Because when we do, like, so a developer, he's going to come in and out. He's going to sell that or, you know, transition that to different organizations, many organizations, and we'll have no conversation or not have a seat at the table. You won't have a seat at the table through us into negotiating anything. So the difference in terms of Apple and including Amazon and Fujitsu is that any jobs that they bring in, they have to be at least a livable wage. And at the time it's $17.83. And I've been working, and you'll probably hear more about this. We're really like trying to do more work in livable wage and really assessing what that number really is. Amazon would have not gotten their economic development package without that promise. That also included having a more robust curriculum development with Wake Tech, to have people who are in our area trained for a more enhanced technical jobs that feed into their organization. Like I say, Fujitsu promised that, Amazon and Apple. But what's beautiful about the Apple relationship is that they're going to invest it in all pre-K, or we're talking 3K, all the way to our Wake Tech students, and a significant amount of money. And infrastructure, that includes broadband. And they specifically said that they're going to provide and expand broadband to all the parts of Wake County and the region who would not have been able to get that opportunity if not. And these are the things that we can negotiate in that, but
Yeah.
not through a TIG.
Right. So I see a question or a comment in chat from Alan Falk, and I do want to address it. So I think he's talking about something I just said. Kane, so when John Kane was asked in connection with the Downtown South project, could he guarantee that the people who worked in Downtown South would make a living wage? He said, no, he couldn't guarantee that because he had no idea who would work in Downtown South. They weren't going to work for him. They were going to work for companies that he leased space to in his buildings or that he sold the buildings to. So he could not make any such guarantee of how many jobs there would be, certainly what they would pay. So that's what I meant to say, Alan Falk, not that there wouldn't be tax benefit from the buildings, but that there wouldn't be any direct relationship between a grant to Kane and living wage jobs in those buildings. So now I want to turn to Wanda Hunter. Wanda Hunter lives in Southeast Raleigh. She's an activist there. And I think we have a slide to introduce her. It's the next one. Yeah, there it is. So Wanda is active on issues of gentrification, dislocations. We currently have a big problem with evictions coming along. And when the eviction moratorium ends, a lot of people are going to lose their homes. So she's a voice for the community. And I want to ask Wanda, what do you see in the TIG policy that would benefit your community and low income communities in general in Raleigh, if anything?
That's an easy answer, Bob. Right now, as it is, nothing. We didn't ask for a stadium. We didn't ask for a tax increase. We already know with the rezoning that Kane has no intention of putting any type of low income or affordable housing. So his company is in line with our current council, in exception of Councilor David Cox, and they don't know what civic engagement is. Now it's a null point. It has no meaning anymore. So as far as when we talk about community benefits agreements, that entails engaging the community, which none of them seem to understand that involves the people that live in those areas, like having conversations, asking these people what they would like to see in their community, how it would benefit the lives that they live right now. And we haven't seen that happening.
If the community were asked what it wants, and Parker used the figure $80 million, I think it's going to be more than that to Kane before all is said and done. But if the community were allowed to weigh in on the use of $80 million, what would you spend it on? And would you let John Kane get his hands on it first? I'm sorry, that's kind of a loaded question.
So first and foremost, I think the community speaks for itself in saying that even the city has done a survey to show that housing is lacking when we talk about low income housing. So if I had to, and I think if we did a survey again, we would see the same thing, that our city is lacking housing for low income, working class individuals. And that's what that money should be spent on, is housing that could be affordable to those individuals. And I wouldn't trust John Kane with $5. So needless to say, what I would do with 80 million, definitely not orchestrated by him. There needs to, if we're going to have the opportunity to allocate those funds, we also have to follow those funds and make sure that they go where they need to go in their allocations.
All right. I want to ask you, if we have time a little later, about workforce training and how that might be handled. But I want to get to Larry Helfont. And Larry lives and represents the community. He's been a CAC leader in the Midtown area. And that pedestrian bridge is intriguing to me, and I know it is to you, that be there. So Councilor Buffkin proposed a TIG grant to a developer on the south side of the Beltline who was going to build 20-story buildings there. He'd like the city to give him a grant to build a bridge over to across the Beltline, and it just happens on the other side. Patrick Buffkin lives there, but tell us about that and the background of planning in the Midtown area, Larry.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for inviting me this evening. Unlike the other speakers, I am retired and live in the Midtown area, and I've lived here for like 40 years. So there's been a lot of progress in the area, some good progress, some bad progress. So before I get into the TIG for the bridge, I'd like to give you some background that would be helpful for the viewers. As most people know, the Midtown area has seen explosive growth over the last 10 years, especially in the St. Albans, Wake Forest Road area. There hasn't been any capital expenditure for road improvements to support the continuing commercial and retail development of North Hills East, Midtown East, or the upcoming Kane Innovation Center or billion-dollar DeWitt Midtown Exchange project. To correct this, the residents asked for and council approved a Midtown small area plan a few years ago. There were 3 bridges contained in the plan to enhance the walkability and traffic flow of Midtown. The one that is the focus today is a medium priority plan for a pedestrian bridge across Interstate 440. It would connect the Wake Tech campus on Bush Street on the north side and the Interstate 440 across the other side to the south side of the North Side Center on Front Street, right next to Wegmans. David Cox made allusion to this before. When the mayor recently asked council for ideas for additional TIGs, Councilor Buffkin, our Midtown District A representative, quickly suggested this pedestrian bridge as a perfect candidate for a TIG. If you notice, Councilor Buffkin lives 1 block from the bridge location. Could we have found a better way to pay for the estimated $5 million bridge other than a TIG? I think the real question is a TIG necessary to fund the bridge? Let's compare it to the Reedy Creek pedestrian bridge, or it's better known as the Museum Bridge across Interstate 440, that links the Museum of Art to the Capital Area Greenway system. Through a financing partnership with North Carolina's Department of Transportation, the $5 million bridge cost the city $600,000. Repeat that, make sure everybody heard that. The city received a public infrastructure benefit that cost $500 million for only $600,000.
$5 million.
$5 million
Yeah.
for $600,000, right? So why wouldn't the proposed pedestrian bridge have a similar funding agreement between the Department of Transportation and the city? Also note that the pedestrian bridge located doesn't even have sidewalks on the north side of where the bridge will wind up. It'd be nice to have an investment in sidewalks in that area to facilitate any possible use of the bridge, especially people walking along the roadway. Could the councilor have picked a better use of TIG money in his area? Well, on the south side of the proposed bridge is the North Side Center that David Cox referenced earlier. I was so benefited here by the previous speakers. The proposed 34-acre mixed-use development across from Wegmans was recently approved without a TIG. The only condition that was added was for an easement for the base of the bridge. Note this condition was not a public request. What public benefit could have been added? Well, one of the amendments in the Midtown Plan, which we mentioned before, was a recommendation for residential component for affordable housing. When a zoning includes housing and buildings greater than 7 stories, there should be a 10% additional units beyond the current entitlement that would be affordable at 80% AMI. The Northside Center includes residential housing with at least 1 building of 20 stories. Rather than supporting that condition, the Planning Commission and the Council took that clause out of the rezoning application for compliance with the comprehensive plan. So, as David Cox mentioned earlier, why didn't anyone negotiate with the developer for the addition of affordable housing and or the bridge? Take your choice. It would have been perfect location with rail and bus access to support the city goal of affordability around transit. Did the mayor and council trade a bridge for affordable housing? Wouldn't the use of a taxpayer money be better spent for a higher priority city goal of affordable housing as opposed to a medium priority pedestrian bridge? Now that I have the benefit of the previous speakers, I also want to pose a question. Parker Martin, in his but-for analysis, raised the question, will the TIG be based on the cost of the bridge or the anticipated cost of the Northside Center? Unknown. Have to wait and see what the actual proposal will be. Bridges are hardline infrastructure improvements. Bridges don't generate increases in property taxes.
So I want to pick up on that and go back to David Cox with a question. The city has a capital spending budget every year, and it has a long list of priority projects for capital funding. And I don't think that pedestrian bridge that Larry Helfand is talking about is on the priority list. And I don't think that anything John Kane's going to build in terms of infrastructure in downtown South is on the priority list. So doesn't it make more sense to use the city's money to fund the highest priority capital needs in the city and not John Kane or the Midtown project's preferred elements?
Right. I mean, the way our transportation and a bridge like that would be considered a transportation project, even though it would be pedestrian. And usually those capital improvement projects are funded through a transportation bond. And those bonds are passed every so many years. And the last one was, I think, in 2017. And of course, we fund things like new road improvements, widening of roads, new roads, bridges, things of that nature using bond money. I think the important thing to remember about a TIG or a TIF is that they were originally conceived and used in order to spur economic development in areas of cities that are experiencing blight and where developers do not want to build. In other words, these are areas of cities where people have avoided going into those areas, and cities were trying to find incentives in order to attract development. In Raleigh, we're not experiencing that. So downtown South, that was a given. That was going to happen and will happen, regardless if there's a TIF or a TIG. The development next to Wegmans, that was going to happen regardless. We're not trying to attract development there. It's coming, and in waves. I mean, we are one of the fastest, if not the fastest, growing cities in the country. So the general purpose for a TIG isn't even being met. We get back to the public benefits. I think we can safely assume that the pedestrian bridge to Wegmans is, and to this development adjacent to Wegmans, is not a public benefit. A stadium in downtown South is not a public benefit. We do not have a policy that actually identifies areas that need help within Raleigh for economic development. We have not established a policy that says that gives high priority to the things that we really need to have developed, such as affordable housing. I mean, those important needs are almost an afterthought. This is really a gift to developers because developers just don't want to pay as many taxes as the rest of us. And when development happens, like for example, in downtown South, Southeast Raleigh, what's the impact going to be? Obviously, the properties around downtown South will go up in value, but their tax rates are not going to go down. So their taxes will eventually go up. And when there's another reassessment, citywide reassessment, which will be coming not too distant future, those properties that go up in value the most will see the greatest increase in taxes. And once development happens in downtown South, you pretty much guarantee that the properties around downtown South will go up in value higher than, say, properties in North Raleigh. So it's entirely conceivable that people who live in North Raleigh will see a tax decrease, while the people who live in Southeast Raleigh will see a tax increase.
Well, I want to.
All of this is not fair.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And the map of the priority areas for TIG grants that Parker showed, and I wonder if we can find that slide, because the areas in green on that, there it is. The areas in green on that slide are not areas that lack for development, quite the opposite. This map is in the city's comprehensive plan as the areas where the city has been subsidizing growth already with road improvements and planned bus service improvements. Part of that green shows Hillsborough Street. That's certainly not lacking for development. Downtown is in green. It's not lacking for development, and it's all upscale development. And down at the bottom of the map in the middle, that's where downtown South will be. And it's on a planned bus rapid transit route. It is targeted for development by the city, and development is coming. If you wanted to use TIG financing, I'm going to direct this to Wanda Hunter, there are areas in South Raleigh, Southeast Raleigh that could use a kickstart in the form of some sort of public subsidy for development, and but they aren't in those green areas. They're the other areas. Are you struck by that, Wanda? You're muted. Yeah.
Yes, because it seems like it has been strategically done. What we're seeing in Southeast Raleigh right now has been a strategic move on the city. Southeast Raleigh, specifically District C, has always been last on the totem pole. They have always been disinvested. And now this is how we see gentrification. This is how it happens. When the city does not upkeep that specific property in those specific areas, and there is no businesses, there are no thriving investments in that area, that land becomes what they consider to be not valuable. And then the next thing you know is people come in and they pick up this land and they build many mansions on it. And as they build the more mansions, then the more the property increases. I can give a real life example myself. I moved to South East College Park, supposedly an affordable housing redevelopment of where Black people were displaced in Southeast Raleigh. Now we are feeling the wrath. Now, we had a big complaint about a developer who got a pass on a $500,000 house on 316 Fisher Street. When I raised sand about it, everybody's like, oh, well, you won't have to worry about those taxes for years. You won't have to worry about the tax value of that coming down for years. Well, it's been years. It's been almost 2 years in August. And that property tax value has now hit my mortgage. So when we're talking about it was affordable for who and for how long? Because Now that we have this affordable housing bond that just passed, we're looking at now talking about a tax increment grant, which is corporate welfare for John Kane, and you're talking about a parks bond coming out on the next ballot. Then all those people that these houses were affordable for were only affordable for a couple of years, because when those bonds and that tax increment grant hits again for their property values, they're going to be wiped out, and that's going to be the second wave of displacement in the same area. So you gotta follow these guys, and you gotta know how to play the game. And now I understand why Habitat pulled out of East College Park. Habitat services low-income working class individuals. They had intentions on building homes in the East College Park development. They pulled out of it because there was no tax abatement or tax protection program for those people. And they knew that if the property values of these homes in this area were going to continue to go up, and these people had no shelter over those tax increases, then they would not be able to survive and sustain in that neighborhood. And now I really see it, and I understand why Habitat for Humanity did not build homes in East College Park. The city knows what they're doing. Larry Jarvis knows what he's doing, and these people have to be held accountable for what they're doing, because they understand what gentrification is and they know how it's happening.
Well, I appreciate that. I would like to see this money not given to developers, but used to create a smart workforce development program in Southeast Raleigh to create jobs and income in the community, and to build the kinds of things that will support the existing low-income housing in the community, and not and to stem what's happening now, which is the steady march of gentrification from downtown out to where you live. I think, do we have questions?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, Bob, I was going to ask you, we've got a number of questions. I can start with the first question that came in about 40 minutes ago. It starts off with a statement, but there is a good question here. It says the city council has a broad and ambiguous criteria for how they award the TIGs that lacks any explicit commitment to countering gentrification and displacement associated with urban development. There is a massive shortage of affordable housing that TIGs could potentially exacerbate. So here's the question. In addition to electoral politics, how can we increase democratic citizen oversight of how the TIGs are awarded to leverage them for more affordable housing and even public housing? That's the question.
I think that's a good question for David Cox, first of all.
Well, there would be a number of ways. First of all, you need policy around that. So for example, we need a policy that says, and honestly, if you're going to have a TIG, you need a policy that says you're going to use it for affordable housing, and you have to define what you mean by affordable housing. It shouldn't be 80% AMI. It should be some combination of 60% AMI and 30% AMI, and say that, okay, this is our policy. This is what you're going to use it for. My larger concern is that rather than having a TIG to pay for that affordable housing, is that you don't give a tax break, but you take in that incremental taxes that you would get, and you allocate that towards affordable housing. And then that way you have a guaranteed, pretty much a guaranteed stream of income every year in terms of property taxes that are coming in. And it could be dedicated more towards things like affordable housing or other infrastructure needs elsewhere in the city, rather than giving it as a tax break to the developer. I just don't believe that we will ever get back as much in terms of a benefit as we're giving in terms of a tax break. I would rather we just collect the taxes and use that money as the community believes it should be used.
Well, let me ask the same question to Maria. And I think the gist of that question was, how do we stop this from happening? I mean, the council is already pretty far down the road toward making TIG grants. The county is thinking about it, I guess. So Maria, what can people do to encourage the county either not to have a TIG policy, or if you have one, to direct the money to the most critical needs in Wake County?
So I don't want to speak towards what's happening in city of Raleigh and their council. So I'm going to only speak towards what we do here in Wake County. Like I say, it's not our priority to create a TIG policy, and our priority is to find different funding streams. I encourage that the community actually near that September to late 2021 time when it starts coming about, and I'll pass along the word when John King does start having those conversations with us. But I want to encourage people to be proactive. You know, your organization and other organizations in the community need to define what you want to see in terms of public benefit. And, you know, Mr. Alan Falk had mentioned it too, which includes precisely what that expectation is, including, you know, like we have 3035 AMI, you know, for our affordable housing, you know, like we have Lorena McDowell, we have very much a robust affordable housing approach. You know, it's not perfect. We're trying our best. We are reaching higher than our expectations that when we started in 2015 on that. And I encourage everybody here to call us to task, like I shouldn't say this, City of Raleigh to task with a list of what you think really needs to happen. Because the reality is, and I think Councilperson Cox had said it, they're gonna build in downtown South. We can't control landowners, we can't control developers, but we can put, you know, parameters around certain things. But we need your input on what those parameters is. We can think about, we can, you know, assume. I don't want to assume. I want to know exactly what you all want. And that'll help us. And, you know, if it ends up being that it gets a little more active in conversation, I've already expressed that we need to do more community engagement with direct community involvement with a series of forums in terms of actually with the county. But I want to hear you all too on how you think communication is best passed along when it comes to the needs, and not only just on this, but everything that we do in the county.
Okay, well,
We have some more questions. Okay, Bob, I can ask another question. You want one?
well, I want to address the question of what's AMI. So AMI is
thank you.
annual median income. And annual median income in Raleigh, in the Raleigh-Cary area for a family of four is, I think, $94,000 plus or minus a year of income. So 30% of that would be in the $30,000 a year range income. And when people talk about 80% AMI, they're really talking about a middle class income. They're not talking about low income people. So with that said, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, here's another old question that has been there for a while. This is a question and a statement referring to TIGs or asking about TIGs. How is this any different than the state level tax carve outs for Apple, Microsoft, and several recent relocations? These are also huge tax breaks for large corporations. They are supported by the Democrats from Wake and the NCGA and Governor Cooper. I never hear anything about our collective opposition to these economic development projects.
Who wants that one?
I can speak to that a little bit. I'm a little skeptical of using tax dollars to attract these companies, but this seems to be the thing that a lot of governments do. Generally speaking, the tax money is given and there are very well-defined parameters in order to get it, in terms of the jobs, in terms of the salaries, in terms of the capital investment that's going to come to Raleigh and North Carolina. And calculations are done so that we actually are benefiting more than we're giving away. So with Apple. I think we've heard in the news that they're promising jobs that with salaries in the $170,000, $180,000 a year range. So a certain number of jobs, a certain amount of infrastructure investment and so forth. And then just the business that they'll do here is a major contribution to our own economic development. So we are actually getting more out of it than we're giving away.
Right, right.
And,
I think
and
there's,
honestly, it's become a competitive thing that if we don't compete for those jobs, then they will go to other states and other communities.
Okay, hold on.
The purpose of a TIG and a purpose of a TIF is entirely different. It isn't to attract businesses into an area. It's to help an area that has been underserved in a city and is in need of economic development. We have people that are living in an area that are in poverty. And that is really the reason for a TIG, is to be able to get jobs and growth in an area of a city that has been neglected. However, we're not using it that way.
Bob, we
Yes,
have several people that have raised their hand and we're not recognizing their hands. So Mike, I'm going to cut you short on reading questions for a minute. Terrence Ruth had his hand raised, Wanda Gilbert Coker, and Joe Maverick. Let's go in that order to get their 3 questions answered.
all right. Thanks, Terrence. Yes.
Thanks again, Livable Raleigh, for putting on this this conversation. Is very powerful. I had a question in terms of Parker's presentation, but anyone can answer. I know we dance around the conversation or the language of inclusionary zoning in North Carolina. So how can a city have a stronger commitment to affordable housing, and how should we understand that term stronger? So if we're comparing Charlotte's approach versus Raleigh's, how would a citizen interpret the word stronger in that sense?
Is Parker still with us? Does he want to take that?
David's ready to take it. David Cox.
Yeah, there are several things that we can do here in North Carolina. As a city, we can lobby the state for things like inclusionary zoning and the ability to be able to mandate affordable housing in our cities. We don't have that capability, but the tragedy of it is that we don't even have that conversation. We're not willing to talk about it. And we need a council majority that is willing to talk about it and is willing to direct the city attorney and our city lobbyists to be able to have those conversations with the legislature and say, you know, these are our problems and we need your help with our problems. And don't just tell us that we can't do things. I mean, they want help with problems in rural areas, and those are legitimate problems. Our small towns throughout the state are hurting economically, generally speaking. And so there has to be a give and take. And but we have to have that conversation. And the problem that we're having is that we've had council majorities that don't bother to even have the conversation and don't bother to raise the issue with the legislature. And so the problems fester and persist.
Hey, Parker, did you want to add anything to that, Parker?
No, ma'am. Councilmember Cox hit it right on the head.
Okay, and then Wanda Gilbert Coker, you have a question?
Yes, I want to make a comment first. From my observation and living here in Southeast Raleigh, and also working in housing justice. One thing is obvious. If John Kane or any other developer was saying, let me use that TIG money to build low income housing only, people housing for 40% and below, if he was asking, or any other developer was asking for that money to build for that demographic only, this event would be turned around and held by the fake aggressive Yimbies, because they would be pissed because he's not satisfying their needs, or this other developer is not, he's looking out for the ones most in needs, not the gentrifiers. So let's be real. When you say affordable, it's not affordable for those who have lived here and whose elders and ancestors blood, sweat, and tears built this city. Now other people want to come here or move into our Black communities and say Black lives matter. If Black lives truly mattered, they wouldn't have gentrified our communities. Now they're saying they want to build housing and want to use our tax money, but it is not for us. So when you all say affordable, please say affordable for who? Affordable for somebody working at Chick-fil-A or somebody who owns 10 Chick-fil-A's. Make it clear, make it plain. Stop playing games and using all these little terms to get people confused. What he is planning on building, he's looking out for the gentrifiers and all those others who want to make money off our ancestors and elders' blood, sweat, and tears. Period.
Wanda, do you have a question?
My question is, why, when people are talking, why won't they just come out and say affordable for who? And affordable housing does not cover everyone. Why I'm looking in the chat, people keep using affordable. Affordable for who? Who are you talking about?
And one follow-up on Wanda Hunter. Wanda, a question we got from was about how can we protect people once they get affordable housing? How can we protect them so that they can stay in their home and it doesn't, as in your case, in 2 or 3 years, you're in jeopardy of losing your home?
Well, I also ran for city council in 2019, and one of the things on my platform and one of the things that concerned me with gentrification in District C was some type of tax freeze for those that are on a fixed income. So those same people that Wanda's talking about, like there's an elder that lives at the end of my street and she's been there since 1996. And she's seen everybody else's house being built up around hers. And with visiting with her this past weekend, I asked her, I said, are you feeling the effects of the property taxes? And she said, yeah. She said, I don't know what I'm going to do. She said, they call me every day about buying my house, you know? And so just giving them some relief, you know, once you're on a fixed income and you lived your life and you worked all your days, the last thing you want is somebody calling you every day about buying something that you finally made happen, a dream of your own of owning a home. And then in your last days, the only thing that you get is phone calls from greedy developers who want to come in and buy what you worked all your life just to get. So I think with whoever's running for city council in the upcoming elections, making some type of tax coverage, tax abatement, anything of that nature to help people who have already been there, who have been in those communities. Stop pushing people out of their communities. The same thing with like Raleigh Housing Authority. Talk to some of the elders over there in Heritage Park this weekend. We had a great time in that community and just talking to them. And one of the elders, she told me, she said, I've lived here for 17 years. She said, I don't drive. She said, I know my bus schedules. There's 2 different buses I can choose from. She said, I know when they come. She said, I know where the bus stop is. And she says, I know where I need to go on the route to get where I need to go to do the things that I need to do because I've been doing it for so long. So if they move me from over here, then I got to learn all this stuff all over again. And that just, you know, it upsets their life because you're older and you already know how to get around and kind of do things. So they have to learn it all over again. You know, it's like a slap in the face. So I think that sometimes we have to, in the words of Marianne, and I hate to use them, but be kind and actually have some real compassion. Get out and talk to people and understand what they go through in their everyday life. If you're not out there talking to the people, then you can't understand what their struggle is. And if you can't understand what their struggle is, don't get on a soapbox and talk about it. If you ain't walked a mile in my shoes, don't tell me how to fix my solutions. Solutions come from the people that are in those communities that go through those struggles.
And Wanda, you know, one of the things that you make me think about is that when Terrence asked about what can we do to make things stronger, I look to you, David Cox, too. It's not just getting affordable housing built and getting families in them. What can we be doing to make this a lifelong opportunity for these families? And, you know, is this a better way to spend the tax breaks than to give it to John Kane for a TIG?
Right. I mean, another thing that we can do, we talked a little bit about inclusionary zoning. We are also able legally to accept zoning conditions that specify affordable housing in when people come for rezoning requests. Now, the last council, we did that, and we got that. We recognized that we had the authority to do that from the city attorney, and we began asking those questions and having those negotiations about including affordable housing as part of rezoning requests. It was a good start. However, with this council, that stopped completely. I mean, we don't even ask the question anymore.
Yeah,
And it's
I'm
what
gonna-
Larry Helfont brought up previously,
Okay, I'm gonna.
that,
Joe,
with the,
I'm sorry, David, I'm trying to get 2 more questions in before we cut off.
that's okay.
Joe, I'm not forgetting about you, Joe, but Maria really wants to respond to this question too.
Yeah, so I want to actually, this is very Raleigh specific, and I'm going to be very brief on this, but we have to take responsibility. There's also many communities all over Wake County that are challenged too. Even in Cary and Morrisville and Zebulon and Garner, like it's happening all over. And so there's a question on what does it mean to have affordable housing? And we're talking about annual median income and all that stuff. But, here at the county, we set it upon income, right? So it's less than $24,000 a year. And there's also stratas that go to 24,000 to 39,000 a year. These are people in our community that are cost burden when it comes to housing. And these are the people that we're trying in every way to provide, having people stay in their homes, providing, funding to repair their homes if they're in disarray. And we talk about preservation. All the developers hate me because I always talk about preservation. I come from a family that if it wasn't for institutional, our home was $20,000 when we bought it. And if it wasn't for my family to be able to keep it, that's part of generational wealth. And that is what's going to also help people in our community as well to pass it along to each person. So thank you.
Okay, Joe, please speak up before everybody's worried about you not getting a chance to ask your question. I'm so sorry, Joe. Thanks for being patient.
You're muted, Joe. You're still muted.
How
there
about
you go.
now?
Now you're in.
There you go. Okay. First of all, I spent 15 years in the General Assembly of North Carolina listening to these kind of arguments. And this is really a political issue and a fiscal issue. It doesn't have a lot to do with a lot of things that you're talking about, and that just muddies the water and it won't fly in the public arena. This is not an if, but a how question that you continue to ask. And what you really ought to question is, should we have this at all? Let me give you some ideas. Do you have a local bill for Wake County and for Raleigh that addresses the TIGs issue? Are there state statutes that support TIG specifically for Raleigh and then for Wake County? This is a political issue, not visceral. Regarding language that one of the earlier presenters talks about, could and must are lousy languages. You want in fiscal business, you want shall. You got to address recapture times in terms of years. Does the Raleigh TIG policy affect bond ratings? You need to go to the state treasurer's local government commission and ask them their position on this particular policy and how it affects the fiscal parts of Raleigh. When you get into affordable housing and equity concerns, all you're doing is muddying the water.
I don't agree with that at all. That's
all right,
Joe.
but it's my turn and I get to talk.
Okay, great.
So this is a political issue and you need to address it in a political way. This is a fiscal issue and you ought to address it in a fiscal way. And let's see if I had any other thing. Oh, I don't see that the NNO and WRL have taken positions on this, no investigative journalism that I've been able to see. So I think you need to talk about it. And for the moderator, let me tell you that for 15 years in the House Finance Committee, of which I was a co-chair, I was against the property tax as an issue totally. So I get where you're coming from, but this is a political statutory issue, and that's how you ought to address it. Anything else is going to hurt you, not help you to win in the marketplace. Thank you very much.
Now, I want to go quickly through here. Does anybody else want to raise your hand quickly? Just one last round. If anyone else? I want to make sure we didn't miss anyone with their hand raised.
Excuse
Okay,
me,
now,
Ms.
David.
Brandon.
Yes,
Ms.
ma'am.
Brandon, this
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is Deborah Ford.
Hey, Deborah.
My chat hand is not working.
Okay, go ahead.
But I would like to address a couple of things. In 2017, I was just writing that to chat to everyone, but I'm gonna say it. In 2017, I attended the unconference of the city of Raleigh that they had. And in that conference, all different subjects came up about what everybody was interested in seeing happen in the city of Raleigh. One of them was affordable housing, of course. I got up, I spoke, and one of the things I talked about was economically affordable housing, because I stated the same thing as I've heard here tonight. Affordable to who? Because if you make $3,000 a month and I make $800, then we can't pay the same mortgage or rent payments. So that's the reason why I stated economically affordable. When I approached at the time the mayor, I was told that in order to, I wanted to know why we allowed developers to come in, build all these high-rise buildings and everything and all this other stuff that they're building. But you won't say, hey, if you want to come build in our city, you need to make at least 1/3, 1/4, 2/5 of those that you're building for people economically can afford those houses. I was told that we had to go to the state level. This, I started it. I got as far as talking to Mrs. Cooper, not Mr. Cooper. Okay, so I had to stop due to health issues. But that's something that we all need to think about. Now, the book that I read stated, the poor will always be with us. And those that can, we ought to take care of our poor because they're not going anywhere. I'm one of them. I did this. I was approached about doing the home economics. I don't know if any of you all saw it about a month or two ago, where they had that little thing on the home economics. Now, these two people that I was interviewed by, we were together almost an hour. But when I saw the program, because of some of the things I probably said, I got even, maybe 5 or 10 minutes on that little skit, because it was only 30 minutes long. So that's my spiel. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Deborah. And Mike Lindsay, you have your hand up. And Larry, you'll be the last two questions.
Yeah, this is just an observation. The question was asked, and I guess I asked it for somebody, about the comparison between a TIG and money that goes to corporations for relocations. And it's a fair question, but the thing I'd point out is when you're competing with companies to move to a location, different locations are competing with each other and the company's making a decision. In this case, nobody's competing with Raleigh to give tax money back to a landowner here. The landowner can't pick up the land and move it to Durham. It's here. It's going to be here. There's no reason to offer this chip to them. None at all.
Larry, I guess you're next in the queue.
Yeah,
Larry,
I just want to make one final comment here. In terms of the TIG policy, if you notice, there was no public input into the TIG policy. Nobody asked any of the residents what that policy should be. Nobody asked any questions. Nobody sent out a survey. It was just created with council members and the mayor and staff. And the same thing happens with development. People ask, why do developers just come in and build? It takes a massive effort to get a public input into any development project. You have to get through the planning commission, you have to get through the city council. And as I pointed out before, the North Side Center had the provision for affordable housing. It would have taken a massive effort to bring it to everybody's attention and get it done. We need more public input.
Yes, so in answer to Terrence's question, what can we do? I mean, people have to get organized to elect a council that will, in the first place, listen to them, because we have a council now that listens to the development industry and nobody else. So do we have any, go ahead, Yvonne.
I was just going to say one comment, Joe, when you talk about that it's political, the political culture is very important. And I think tonight what we're hearing is that we're all saying that our beliefs, our opinions, our values, our emotions are important to the political process. And we do need to consider what this city considers its values when it comes to its citizens and its voters and its taxpayers. So let's listen to Joe and let's make this very political. And let's find out some more information about some of the fiscal impacts, like on the ability to bond. So, but let's never forget that these social, cultural, political culture issues that we care about are important and should be the foundation of how we vote and how we act as citizens to each other.
Wanda's on the right track.
All right, well, yes, she is. And I look at the city that we live in, and it is growing fast in a certain way. It is growing fast with tall, expensive apartment buildings and nothing else. There's no other housing being built. Well, that and $500,000 and up single family houses. We are not thinking about people with needs. We're not thinking about the 16,000 households in Raleigh that pay more than half their income in rent because their income is low and their rent is high and there is no housing for them. So that is not written in stone. We can change that, but the development industry doesn't want to change it because the development industry is extremely profitable doing what they're doing. And to move that ship in a different direction is, as Larry said, an enormous political task. But if we don't undertake it, it won't happen. So I think we're, yeah, go ahead, Yvonne.
Let's bring our last slide up.
Yes, that's the last slide. So Livable Raleigh is a group that's about a year old. We're a 501c4. We can accept donations. We are politically active. We are trying to communicate to the public about these issues. I can't remember specifically who said it, but somebody said we need to do a better job. I think Maria said it. We need to do a better job of communicating what we're for. We keep seeing stuff from our city council that is pretty horrifying to me, and we react to it. But we've got to get out ahead of it, set out an agenda that we want candidates to run on. We need to elect a different city council. So that the fine print there, help us continue to advocate for the local issues that matter. We have a pretty good website. We got a lot of blogs on that website. There's our PO box. We have a Twitter account. We have a Facebook account. We're out there, and we're trying to fill in the job that I'm afraid our media is not covering local issues the way it used to. So we're trying to fill in that gap. Susan Mariama, did you want to send us home? She's the president of our organization.
Well, I think everybody's done a fabulous job tonight. All of you have put a lot of time and effort into the presentations, but I also applaud our guests here tonight. Everyone is caring, interested, engaged. You're trying to be informed. We are trying to help inform you. And I hope you will stay engaged with us. For those of you who had questions that we did not get to, we will be answering every question that we did not answer live tonight and posting the answers with a question on our website, along with a link to the recording of tonight's event. So if you want to go back and look at any of the slides, Parker Martin's slides were just amazing because he was asking questions in a different way than we've been asking. And it was such a pleasure to have a fresh new voice among us. So we will have that information for you. And thank you very, very much for staying late. I know it's someone's bedtime somewhere. So thanks so much. Take care. Good night.